Welcome to the Sleepers Media YouTube channel where we recap and preview all the big games across college basketball. There's a lot of big games this weekend, but a pretty big one going on in Atlanta between Auburn and Indiana. If you have not noticed, I am not Greg, and that is not Carter. I'm Brian Ralph. That's Riley Davis, both of Heat Check CBB, here to break down this matchup between the Tigers and the Hoosiers. I think this can be a statement game for both teams, really, Riley. We're looking at a standpoint where Indiana is 7-1. Auburn is 6-2. Auburn is coming off a loss to App State, but I think both teams have looked maybe better than we thought, but neither has a real validating stamp as a good win. I think this would serve that for both teams. So let's look at it from the Indiana perspective. What are you looking at from the Hoosiers going into this game?
I think that's well said. Indiana, I've been tough on them as far as almost losing to Army, squeaking by Florida Gulf Coast. Then since then, they got the win over Harvard, who's probably the best team in the Ivy League, and have a guy who will I bet Malik Mack probably won't finish his career at Harvard. No inside intel on that, but that's the type of dude who high majors are going to be back channeling their way to get him. That was a pretty impressive win where they pulled away, beat Maryland at home, which Maryland's pretty bad, but winning at Michigan. I know Michigan has struggled a lot recently, but that's still I think it shows that Woodson is sort of figuring this team out. I still believe it to be a oddly constructed roster that has too many bigs and too many non-shooters to have much of a ceiling, but they're avoiding bad losses at the very least. And you got to give them credit for being 7-1, even if you can sort of pick holes in some of their resume. I think this is a game that it's going to be in Atlanta. Auburn wasn't very good at football this year, obviously, so you got to think their fans are going to rally behind the Tigers on the hardwood, and especially Atlanta is Auburn country. I feel like they'll pack out that arena. It's going to be a pretty tough environment for them. But yeah, I think in order for them to be able to get that signature win here, they're going to need something out of the guards. It's been a lot of bricks from Trey Galloway. Gabe Cupps is a nice role player, but they need him to be more than that right now. I think he started the last two games for them. Because someone tells me we're not going to see another no-show performance from Aiden Holloway on the Auburn side like he did against App State.
Yeah, the backcourt is big. Indiana has turned things around, for at least from the way they looked early on in the season. I think because they've embraced the whole fact that they have three legitimate big guys who should be dominant. And Woodson has figured out a way to play those guys together and play them in a productive way. You could argue shouldn't have taken them a month to get to that conclusion, given the roster construction and the lack of options really on the perimeter. But I do think there are signs that this is moving in the right direction. And the Maryland and Michigan wins show that. Now, to your point, both Maryland and Michigan have struggled this season. Michigan looked like a completely different team now than they did the first 2 weeks of the season. Maryland's offense is incredibly putrid and terrible and awful. But Auburn is a stiff test. And the flip side of this, from the Auburn perspective, your best win right now, they're 5-2. They're not 6-2. I think they said 6-2 earlier. Only 5 wins. Best one is over Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech team that probably isn't very good, and you do have the loss to App on your resume. Like right now, you're hanging your hat on the fact that you played Baylor close in the first week of the season. You kind of need to beat Indiana if you are going to prove yourself to be a top 25 team, which I know Auburn thinks it is, and its fans certainly think it is. I think it can be too, but this is the kind of game where you need to get reliable performances from your freshman backcourt.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's like Auburn was a team I was high on coming into the season. I had them at the back end of our top 25. But like you said, playing Baylor close and having a lead late in that game can only get you so far. Eventually, you got to beat some teams that might have a chance to get into the tournament. Which, not saying Indiana for sure gets there, but again, just after starting 7-1, I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's Selection Sunday and their name is called. Whereas Virginia Tech, don't see it happening for them. Definitely don't see it happening for Notre Dame and the other teams that Auburn's beat. One of the craziest things about this Auburn team, though, that I wonder if they can get it going is their three-point shooting. Because Auburn and three-point shooting have gone together like Aaron Craft and Cookouts since Bruce Pearl has been there. That's been what's like defined his tenure there, and the fact that like it's so crazy to see an Auburn team that's below 30% as a team. And we
Mhm.
saw in Boone, they couldn't buy a shot. They were 3 for 27. Like, I know Boone's a tough place to play. You want to talk about crazy fan bases, but still, like, Holloway's got to get it going. Denver Jones hasn't really translated quite as easily as I would have thought he would. Yeah, so this is a game where you need your guards, you need your backcourt to show that they can perform well against our conference opponent.
How do you think Janai Broom will stand up to Indiana's front court? We talked about that, but Broom is probably the best player in the front court on either team, but he has to kind of carry the load for Auburn. How do you view that matchup?
Yeah, I think Broom to me, like with him, he's old and he's a unit. Like I know Kel'el Ware has been excellent and has put himself in lottery consideration. Like I've seen multiple mock drafts that have him late lottery now. He's blocking shots like he did last year. He's anchoring an Indiana defense that's been probably a little bit better than expected. But yeah, Broom, I think will still be able to draw fouls. He hasn't been, granted, he hasn't been able to to hit from the free throw line. He can step out and hit threes a little bit, but I still think his bread is best buttered when he's working out of the low post.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see
Uh,
that shaking out?
it's I think going to be as bad as this is probably the stiffest test for Indiana defensively,
Mm-hmm.
because um, outside of UConn, let's say that, but just from a pure athleticism standpoint, Auburn's guards are going to be more athletic than anybody Indiana has faced this season, and there are already questions about the ability of Indiana's backcourt to defend, right? So that if Auburn's backcourt is looking for a breakout game, matchup wise, this has a chance to give them the opportunity to really have that.
Mm-hmm.
If Broom can hold his own inside and limit Renault, um, and not have one of them go off or at least offset their production, I lean heavily Auburn here. But all those things are bigger question marks in actuality than it is just me here sitting saying them. So looking ahead, how do you see this game playing out?
I think Auburn gets the job done. I feel like I mean, both teams should be equally motivated, but I still think Auburn's better. Um, as a whole, there's still questions about their ceiling because it's kind of like you look at they have, in my opinion, they have four guys who I know are good: Aiden Holloway, Trey Donaldson, Jalen Williams,
Mm-hmm.
Janai Broom, Baker Mazzara. I feel like he's still kind of got something to prove. Katie Johnson is so erratic, but then again, at least Katie Johnson has made some shots on a big stage before, but you want to see if like can they find that fifth starter to step up, whether it's Denver Jones, whether it's Chad Baker Mazzara. Like,
Mm-hmm.
can one of those guys prove to be reliable and hopefully the other one be reliable off the bench? Um, but as a whole, I think, yeah, Holloway and Donaldson, I think they're gonna rise to the occasion and be a little bit too much for those Indiana guards to be able to contain. And additionally, I like Janai Broom's ability to get kel'el Ware in foul trouble or to get Malik Renault in foul trouble, whoever Woodson throws on him. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's he's drawn a ton of contact this year, and I think that continues.
And one thing we hadn't talked about was Xavier Johnson. It remains to be seen if he'll play in this game. Woodson has said his status is kind of up in the air. If Indiana is going to win, they need him
Mm-hmm.
to handle Auburn's pressure. If nothing else, he will provide scoring, and we can have a debate about how good Xavier Johnson actually is. But in this game, with the pressure that Auburn is going to put on you defensively, make you handle the ball, and the limitations of Indiana's backcourt, everywhere else, just the lack of depth, the lack of options, they need Xavier Johnson to, I think, be successful in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Even with him, I would take Auburn. I think this bodes well for Auburn's backcourt and some of those guys, Holloway and Donaldson in particular, to have big games. I think Broom, I trust him more than I trust Indiana's bigs. Maybe we'll get around to that with Indiana. I think the recent surge has had more to do with their opponents necessarily than Indiana. But at some point, you have to give Indiana credit, and this is their game to try and prove that. I just think on paper, Auburn matches up well and is really strong in the areas where Indiana is not.
Mm-hmm.
And guards dictate basketball. in college these days, and Auburn's got a major advantage there. So I'm gonna go with the Tigers as well.